Hello, everyone, and welcome to Guidepost in Motion, a podcast highlighting risk, compliance, and security professionals with insights meant to keep you, your business, and operations moving forward safely and securely. My name is Terry King, and I'm a regional director at Guidepost Solutions based in London, UK, and I specialize in the design, consultation, and implementation of large enterprise electronic security solutions for commercial environments. And joining me today, all the way from Los Angeles, is Ahmad Zoua. Ahmad has a really strong background in working on large, complex technology projects, and he handles a broad range of efforts from inception to implementation. Today, Ahmad and I are going to discuss the post-COVID world and the effects in the commercial real estate market and its relationship with edge data centers. Ahmad, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Terry. I'm happy to be here, and I look forward to our discussion.
Excellent. Now, Ahmad, before we dive into today's discussion, I could give you a good explanation of what a traditional data center is, and I've worked on a number of them. But can you give us an overview of what an edge data center is and how that's different than a traditional suite environment?
Yes, edge data center are relatively a new concept, and it came to life following the 5G technologies and the promise of low latency. So the edge data center is basically a mini version of the traditional data center that you and I we used to work on, and it will be implemented in major cities and in the suburb in major areas, just to be as close as possible to the users. And the whole concept of that is because of the 5G low latency, to be able to accommodate that from the data center perspective, you need now to be closer to the consumer rather than be isolated and geographically in a different area.
Interesting. So we're seeing a little bit of a full circle with data centers. We started off in that co-location market, which to a certain degree was almost like this edge data center. And we moved to these large hyperscale environments, which required a lot of land and were outside of major markets to support the growing infrastructure that was the World Wide Web. But today we're seeing a return almost to these smaller places that are there to support all of the end users and, quite frankly, all of the remote workers that are out there working from home and not working in the commercial space. So interesting little conundrum we have, right? Because of this post-COVID world and the realization by many major companies, and we'll talk about some of those in just a moment, that they no longer need the real estate footprint that they have. We've created a huge vacuum of commercial real estate space. According to groups like CBRE, at the end of 2020, there was over 137 million square feet of office space that was available for sublease across the US. Year over year, that's an increase of 40%. And we haven't seen that kind of figure since 2003. And worldwide, companies like JP Morgan, Price Waterhouse, Salesforce, and even here in London, Barclays are among those people that are downsizing their office space because they no longer need it. They realize they can do just as much and be just as productive with remote workers. So we ultimately see that we're going to continue this trend of commercial real estate space being left vacant and creating these large pools. But yet the very trend that may allow workers to work remote more efficiently and effectively could be an opportunity. But that is different than just simply different companies moving from commercial real estate space to commercial real estate space, right? We're no longer just changing the superficial aspects of a footprint within a built environment. Will these edge data centers in these commercial urban spaces, will they be shared with typical tenants and regular tenants?
Well, that's the tricky part. It's going to be yes and no at the same time. So yes, they might be sharing the same lobby, but no, they might not be sharing the same office space because there's a specific security requirement and a way that the data center get operated. It's totally different than the way that you operate and maintain a typical high-rise building. So bringing this together, there should be some accommodation that need to be happening to make sure you still accommodate the safety and the critical requirement that come with the data center, but at the same time not impacting and the user experience who come to this office don't want to be feeling like under investigation or going to the airport, right? We all don't like when we see any TSA officer at the airport. While we respect their work, and obviously like they're doing their job, but we still like, now I have half an hour to wait. So you don't want to create that kind of environment in an office space, but you still have to make sure that you are accommodating the security for a data center.
Right. So, maintaining that sense of user experience is important for the commercial real estate market. And in terms of it's not also just simply reconfiguring the floor plan, but having design data centers, we know that requires lots of power, it requires lots of air conditioning. It's not just security, even though that's our specialty. It takes a lot. It's not just a plug and play. There's not a simple formula to it. So tell me about what it's going to take a standard building and reconfigure these mechanical components in order to support that data center.
That's a great question, Terry. I mean, there's a lot of consideration that the commercial real estate companies, they need to take into consideration when they want to take on any data centers. First of all, how many floors do you have that are available? The closer to the first floor or the ground floor is the better for you, because there's a lot of structural concern that you have to look into when you're like adding data centers. You have to look into redundancy. Do you have redundancy on the power? Do you have redundancy on the service providers coming in? Do you have enough capacity for the power as well? Usually the commercial real estate office, when an electrical consultant come and design it, they design it based on a couple of watt per square footage. Now you're coming and put in the typical server rack is 7 kilowatt, but now with the high density, and especially for an edge data center, we're looking into like 25 kilowatt or maybe even up to 40 kilowatt per a rack, and that's 2x2 space. So do you have enough capacity to accommodate this high power consumption? All of these considerations need to be observed properly prior to discuss it. And the 5G is happening. So the question is more now, do we need to be followers, or do we need to be leaders in the commercial real estate and be able to like be ready for these data centers, or for this 5G to be happening in downtown LA, in Chicago, or other big cities?
Excellent, excellent. Data centers are one of the most secure environments in any environment, whether it is a suite, a set of suites, or a data center park. You know that it's filled with Constantine wire, it's filled with gates and cameras and access control and biometrics, and there is operational security. It is fortified like Fort Knox. And for good reason, because it is important that we continue to operate and maintain business. And the downtime, there can be no downtime. So what does it mean to secure what was a traditional commercial office space now for an edge data center?
Adding a data center into your high-rise building, that will have an impact on security on multiple levels, on physical security and operation for that facility itself. Because adding a critical facility or critical infrastructure to a high-rise or a mixed-use building, now you increase the threat level of that building, and now you will have to look into, do we have glass in the lobby? Do we have bollards and barriers in front of the building? Where's the parking structure associated with this building? Is it below it's underground parking, or is it on the side? All of these questions now we have to raise and ask to know exactly what kind of threat that this building will be on. And then you have to look at the operation of this building. For a typical high-rise building, the operation is way easier. Now you have to add more restrictions and different type of operation. And the easiest way to deal with that is to consolidate and isolate the infrastructure that support the data center, the edge data center, from your typical building, and have it a dedicated electrical room, dedicated mechanical room that feed that space and increase the security and policies and procedures for these rooms. Because typically it's easy to access any high-rise IDF, for example. You can just go there. Usually most of them are the physical key, easy to duplicate, and you can access that. You can't have something like that in a data center space. These rooms need to be secure. There has to be a camera. All of these need to be taken into consideration. And then in the lobby, the access to that space need to be secured and controlled, but in a way, as I mentioned before, without impacting the other tenants' experience and not making them feel like prisoners in that place.
Ahmad, you mentioned all of the changes to the building that's going to impact the other tenants. Multiple layers. The experience is going to change. Certainly, it raises concerns for not only the tenants, but those using the building and adjacent to it. These are very state-of-the-art facilities. And it's not just, as I mentioned, a plug and play. It's not very simply just transitioning one floor plan to another. It seems to me that any tenant coming into your unused space would be a great investment. Do you think this is a great investment for the commercial real estate market?
It is a great investment in the real estate market, but you have to look at the ROI as well. Is it like if it's going to be a multi-million dollars structural support change, then you have to look at, is it actually worth it for that specific building, or maybe you need to look at the other buildings that you have, or maybe it's not worth it. But overall, I think it's worth the investment, and there's a big opportunity for, to be a lead, as I mentioned before, in the technology up front, because like I mentioned, 5G is coming. So even you are a leader or you are a follower, and all commercial real estate companies, they all want to be leaders in the technology world, and I think there's it's great exposure for them and to keep them always at the edge.
Oh, interesting. And it also is worth noting that these leases that are typically shared within the data center environment are much longer leases than the traditional 3 to 5 year lease in the commercial space. We're talking 10, 15 years. So these investments, while they may be upfront more expensive, long term, there is a long term return on investment and a security within that market space, correct?
That is correct. In an edge data center, the maintenance on it is not that high, especially from the building engineer's perspective. There's obviously the data center operation is still high, but if you are the building engineer, you don't have a lot of maintenance to do with this space, so you don't have to worry about it. So the cost of OpEx on it is really low, but the return on it is really high. And as you mentioned, Terry, like the leases on these spaces is 10 to 15 years, but that's the life cycle of the data center. And usually most of the data center operators, they don't just move and go away. Most of the time they will just replace the existing equipments with the newer equipments to accommodate the new technology. So these spaces now, it's not rented for like 10 to 15 years only, but there's an opportunity to keep the lease going for a while.
That's fantastic. It does seem like a really good investment, a really good solution to the down commercial real estate market. Ahmad, we really appreciate your insight and your expertise and the overview of what an edge data center is. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Terry. It was my pleasure.
And for our listening audience today, we really appreciate you tuning in. For more information on securing your data center, whether it's an edge data center or a traditional suite, please visit our website at guidepostsolutions.com. Thank you.